Welcome to the deep dive. I have to tell you, you are in for a highly intensive, ultra long, and just incredibly fascinating deep dive today.
Oh, yeah, you're going to want to settle in for this one.
Seriously, grab a coffee, get comfortable in your chair, or if you're driving, just log in.
Yeah.
We are going to be here for quite a while because we are really taking our time unpacking a text that is making massive waves online right now.
Unavoidable waves, really.
Exactly. Today, we are doing an exclusive review of a brand new, highly anticipated ebook. It's titled Guarding Male Spaces, Sacred Manosphere Transmission of Red Pill Knowledge from Time Immemorial, and it's by Conrad Riker.
And it is an incredibly dense, provocative, and highly structured text. But before we get into the actual architecture of what the author is proposing, we really need to set the stage. We have to explain what this document actually is, who it's speaking to, and the specific ecosystem it comes from.
Okay, let's unpack this. But real quick, a reminder to you, our listener, please make sure to like and subscribe to the show. It really helps us keep bringing you these exhaustive deep dives into the cultural materials shaping our world.
Absolutely.
And if you want to follow along with us, or read the source material for yourself, and I highly suspect you'll be insanely curious to see the primary text after hearing the sheer scale of what we're about to discuss, you can check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the ebook directly. You should also definitely follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack to see how these ideas are being discussed in real time.
Right. So to understand this text, you have to understand the target demographic. This book is explicitly and unapologetically written for a men's rights activist audience and what is broadly referred to as the red-pilled manosphere.
Right. And for anyone who might not be familiar with that specific internet lexicon, the manosphere is a loose, decentralized collection of forums, blogs, and content creators focusing on masculinity and men's issues.
Yeah, and the term red-pilled, which obviously borrows from the movie The Matrix, refers to the belief within these communities that they have awakened to a hidden, often uncomfortable truth about how society actually functions, especially regarding gender dynamics.
And the book basically serves as a highly detailed survival manual for navigating modern institutions. Riker dedicates a massive portion of the text to understanding the history of our social and legal institutions, how they were originally built, how they functioned for centuries, and what happened before, as he claims, they were completely captured and re-engineered by feminists and Marxists.
He paints a picture of a world that has fundamentally turned hostile toward men, and he offers a very specific set of blueprints for what to do about it.
Which brings us to a mandatory, critical disclaimer that we have to issue right here at the top.
Yes, very important.
The text we are analyzing today contains highly politically charged content. It utilizes intense rhetoric, features deeply controversial viewpoints, and proposes extreme strategies regarding gender, law, and modern society.
We want to make it abundantly clear to you, the listener, that we are absolutely not taking sides here.
Not at all.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints, the strategies, the politics, or the ideology of the content. Our mission is strictly and fiercely analytical. We are acting as neutral guides, impartially reporting on the content provided.
Exactly. Our only goal is to convey, deconstruct, and analyze the ideas exactly as they are contained in the original source material. We just want you to be well informed about a text that is heavily influencing a very specific subculture.
Think of us as your audio tour guides, walking you through a very intense, highly fortified ideological landscape. We're just holding the flashlight and pointing out the architecture.
So stepping into that landscape, what's the core thesis here? Riker argues that male-only spaces, spaces entirely devoid of female presence or influence, are not some outdated luxury.
Right, they aren't a symptom of historical bigotry or a boys' club mentality.
He argues they are a hardwired biological and psychological necessity for men. His central claim is that without these exclusive spaces, men are being systematically dismantled and destroyed by what he terms a gynocentric society.
Which he defines as a society that places female needs, perspectives, and safety as the absolute center of all cultural and legal frameworks.
And what's fascinating is how he structures this. He completely bypasses the standard internet grievances and builds this massive framework. He starts with evolutionary psychology to establish a biological baseline.
Then he moves through exhaustive historical breakdowns of male institutions to show how those biological needs were met in the past.
From there, he pivots to modern legal and social strategies that he claims are destroying those institutions. And finally, he proposes the literal, physical, and digital construction of new fortresses.
He firmly believes that modern men must actively and deliberately build these heavily guarded parallel structures if they're going to survive the current cultural climate.
And we are going to explore every single layer of that architecture today. The biology, the deep-seated grievances, the physical sanctuaries, the alternative economics, and the extreme vetting processes he advocates.
Let's start with the foundational layer, what the book calls the primal blueprint and the third place crisis. To establish his baseline, Riker leans very heavily on evolutionary psychology, specifically citing the extensive research of evolutionary biologist David Buss.
Yes, David Buss is a foundational figure in evolutionary psychology. He's best known for his massive cross-cultural studies on human mating strategies. Riker takes Buss's research and distills it to argue that men are fundamentally biologically wired for brotherhood and hierarchical cooperation.
The analogy he uses in the text is incredibly vivid. He talks about our early ancestors hunting mammoths. He paints this picture of the Pleistocene epoch, arguing that you simply couldn't take down a mammoth alone. It was impossible.
To survive, you needed a highly coordinated, completely focused, and deeply trusting group of men working shoulder to shoulder.
Right. In that environment, competence wasn't about getting a promotion, it was a literal matter of life and death. If the man next to you failed, you all died.
Therefore, Riker argues, the male brain evolved to crave and require environments where men are tested against each other, where hierarchy is established through raw competence and absolute trust is forged through shared danger.
And he immediately contrasts this male evolutionary imperative with what he describes as the female evolutionary imperative. Relying again on Buss's research across 37 different cultures, the text argues that women are biologically wired for a concept called hypergamy.
For the listener who hasn't encountered that term, hypergamy is the evolutionary instinct to seek out, secure, and mate with the highest status, most resource-rich provider available.
Exactly. Riker argues that in a harsh ancestral environment, a woman's survival and the survival of her offspring depended entirely on securing a man who could provide and protect.
So you have these two distinct biological realities, according to the book. Men wired to form insular, highly competent, competitive bands of brothers to secure resources, and women wired to seek out the top tier of those men to secure those resources for themselves.
The book's major premise is that these two realities are currently colliding violently in modern society. Riker's argument is that instead of acknowledging this underlying biology, modern institutions actively pathologize natural male instincts.
The competitiveness, the stoicism, the aggressive drive to build, the need for hierarchical brotherhood separated from women, he claims all of these biological imperatives have simply been relabeled by modern society as toxic masculinity.
Which is a brilliant rhetorical pivot on his part. By framing toxic masculinity not as a set of learned bad behaviors, but as the criminalization of innate male biology, he sets up the modern world as fundamentally unnatural.
He asserts that modern society is effectively trying to chemically and psychologically castrate men by denying them the spaces where these instincts can be safely and productively expressed.
To prove that men have historically always recognized this need and built these spaces, the book takes the reader on a sprawling historical tour of male fortresses.
And we aren't just talking about your grandfather's bowling league in the 1950s. Riker goes deep into antiquity. He starts with Sumerian beer halls from 4,000 years ago.
He describes them in granular detail, painting them not just as places to get drunk, but as vital societal pressure valves.
These were places where men went to escape the demands of domestic life, the expectations of provision, and just exist in a state of unvarnished reality with other men.
If we connect this to the bigger picture he's drawing, he's tracing a continuous, unbroken lineage of male sanctuaries across human history. He moves from Sumeria to the medieval period, focusing heavily on trade guilds.
Oh, the guilds. He details how these guilds operated as supreme meritocracies. You had to apprentice for 14 grueling years, performing menial, punishing labor, before you were even allowed to touch a master's anvil or carve a piece of stone.
These were spaces of intense, exclusionary merit. They were entirely male, entirely focused on competence, and completely insulated from outside, non-guild influence.
And then he leaps forward to 18th century London, focusing on the legendary gentlemen's clubs, places like the Carlton Club or White's. The way he describes these clubs is fascinating. He talks about men like Winston Churchill or William Pitt the Younger, sitting in these massive leather-bound rooms.
But the key detail Riker highlights isn't the luxury, it's the isolation. He argues that these clubs were the engine rooms of the British Empire precisely because they were spaces where men could discuss grand strategy, bare-knuckle politics, and brutal wars without any distractions.
They didn't have to moderate their language, they didn't have to worry about offending delicate sensibilities, and there was no outside moderation telling them how to behave. It was pure, unfiltered male strategy.
But then, the text brings us crashing into the modern era, and what Riker diagnoses as the third place crisis. Sociologically speaking, a third place is a social environment that is separate from your first place, which is the home, and your second place, which is the workplace.
It's the pub, the cafe, the barbershop, the bowling alley. The book claims these crucial, historically male-dominated third places are rapidly vanishing, leaving men isolated.
The statistics he pulls to back this up are genuinely startling. For instance, he cites data showing that 7,000 British pubs have permanently closed their doors since the year 2000.
Now, you might think, well, economic shifts, changing tastes, maybe real estate prices, but Riker argues this erasure wasn't just economic. He claims it was deliberately accelerated by legislative changes, specifically pointing to things like sweeping anti-smoking laws.
His argument is that these laws disproportionately affected working class men who relied on the local pub as their only sanctuary to smoke a cigarette, have a pint, and blow off steam after brutal back-breaking shifts. He views the legislation as an attack on the culture of the space itself.
This raises an important question in the text. How did the broader legal system accelerate this erasure of male spaces? Riker points an accusing finger directly at massive, sweeping anti-discrimination laws.
Specifically, he targets the UK's Equality Act 2010 and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act in the United States. While these laws were drafted to ensure equal access and prevent unjust discrimination, Riker argues they were aggressively weaponized by feminist activists to systematically dismantle traditional, harmless men's spaces.
He provides a whole list of casualties to these laws. He cites the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, which traditionally served as a male bastion. He notes how they were pressured into introducing female-only hours in their gyms and pools, but crucially, without establishing reciprocal male-only hours.
He talks about local old-school barbershops being legally threatened and forced to become unisex salons, changing the dynamic of a place where men historically went to talk freely.
And perhaps the most dramatic example he uses is the case of a 300-year-old men's club in Bath, in the United Kingdom. This was an institution that had survived centuries of war, famine, and social upheaval.
But under the modern Equality Act, the club was sued and legally forced to either admit women as full members or face permanent closure by the state. The club ultimately had to fold its centuries-old tradition.
Riker uses this to hammer home his point that forced integration isn't actually about achieving equality, it is an act of ideological colonization designed to ensure there is literally nowhere on Earth a man can go to escape female oversight.
Because men legally cannot hold these public spaces anymore without the threat of a lawsuit, Riker argues they are being forced to build underground. And this leads to one of the most vivid, specific anecdotes in this entire section.
It's a story from 2015 about a highly successful Silicon Valley founder. This guy is working on cutting-edge hardware, specifically a prototype for a commercial jetpack.
During a crucial board meeting to secure next-round funding, 3 female venture capitalists apparently vetoed his jetpack project.
But they didn't veto it because the physics were wrong or the market wasn't there. According to the book, they vetoed it because the engineering team didn't meet their firm's diversity and inclusion metrics.
The founder's reaction to this, as detailed by Riker, perfectly encapsulates the entire ethos of the book. The founder realized that the traditional, above-ground corporate structure was totally compromised by ideology.
So what did he do? He used his own money to literally excavate and build a massive, heavily soundproofed, members-only speakeasy bunker beneath his garage.
A literal underground bunker.
Yeah, he built a secret door, stocked it with top-tier whiskey, and instituted a strict, unbreakable rule. Absolutely no women were allowed inside under any circumstances, unless they were the ones delivering the pizza.
Why? Simply so he and his core team of male engineers could sit around, sketch on whiteboards, argue about propulsion systems, and do real, unhindered technological work without the constant looming threat of ideological interference or HR complaints.
Riker holds this guy up as a modern-day hero, a guy who realized the system was rigged and decided to build his own fortress beneath it.
That anecdote is a perfect, seamless bridge into the second major section of the book. The founder retreated because he felt betrayed by the institutions that were supposed to foster innovation. This introduces what Riker terms institutional betrayal.
This section outlines the core, deep-seated grievances that drive the modern manosphere. He argues that society demands total utility from men while offering them absolutely zero protection or respect in return.
This section is heavy. He starts with the stark concept of the disposability of men, specifically looking at the workplace and the military. He wants to prove that society fundamentally does not care if men live or die, as long as the infrastructure keeps running.
The primary statistic he uses to anchor this argument comes straight from OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Riker points out that year over year, a staggering 93% of all workplace fatalities are men.
And he doesn't just present that statistic in a vacuum. He uses it to highlight what he views as a grotesque societal hypocrisy. He argues that mainstream feminist organizations are incredibly vocal, constantly demanding equal representation in safe, climate-controlled, prestigious environments like corporate boardrooms, political offices, tenured university positions.
But, he notes, they're entirely, deafeningly silent when it comes to demanding equal battlefield deaths. You never see a protest demanding 50% female representation in municipal sewer maintenance, deep-sea crab fishing on the Bering Sea, or high-altitude logging.
The highly lethal, physically punishing jobs that literally keep civilization from collapsing. Riker argues that society is perfectly happy to let men have a monopoly on dying in the dark.
To really drive this emotional point home, he recounts a horrific story about 14 Texas oil riggers who were killed in a massive, catastrophic rig explosion. He describes the visceral reality of that kind of labor, the heat, the danger, the sheer physical toll.
He calls it the lethal lottery of blue-collar male labor. And then he sharply contrasts the deafening societal silence surrounding those 14 dead men with the massive corporate and media attention given to modern HR complaints.
Exactly. He paints a scenario where a man bleeding out in a trench or burning on an oil rig barely makes the local news, while a woman in a corporate office might receive a massive six-figure payout and national media sympathy for a perceived microaggression, a poorly worded email, or a comment about her tone.
He asks his reader directly, where is the outrage for the disposable men? He extends this argument of disposability to the state level by pointing to the military draft.
In the United States, it remains a federal felony for an 18-year-old boy to fail to register for the Selective Service. His access to student loans, federal jobs, and his very freedom hinge on his willingness to be drafted into a war.
Women, meanwhile, are completely and legally exempt from this burden. For Riker, this is the ultimate undeniable proof that the state views male lives as fundamentally disposable cannon fodder.
If the workplace and the state view men as disposable, what about the home? Riker then pivots to present a completely scathing, terrifying indictment of family courts and what he calls the divorce industrial complex.
If you are a man reading this book, this is the chapter designed to keep you awake at night. He completely strips away the romantic notion of modern marriage.
Under current no-fault divorce laws, he frames marriage not as a partnership, but as financial Russian roulette, where the chamber is fully loaded and the gun is almost always pointed at the man's head.
The statistical foundation for this argument is the claim that women initiate roughly 70 to 80% of all modern divorces. Yet, despite initiating the dissolution of the contract, Riker claims that men are still the ones paying 97% of all alimony awarded.
He argues that this system completely incentivizes the destruction of the family unit because the party initiating the breakup suffers almost none of the financial consequences and often reaps a massive financial windfall.
The anecdotes he provides to back this up are engineered to induce pure, unadulterated dread in his target audience. He doesn't hold back. He refers to modern family courts as gynocratic gulags.
Let's look at the story of a guy he calls Dave. Dave is a blue-collar mechanic living down in Florida. According to the book, Dave was taken to the cleaners in his divorce and is now legally mandated by the state to pay $3,400 every single month to his ex-wife.
Now here is where Riker highlights the perceived insanity of the system. Because of specific Florida legal statutes regarding permanent alimony, Dave cannot petition to stop or lower those payments, even though his ex-wife has her new boyfriend living with her in the house Dave bought.
The psychological toll this takes is a major focus of the text. Riker describes Dave's current reality. He's literally living on an air mattress in the back of his humid, sweltering work van, eating canned food, working 60 hours a week just to avoid being thrown in jail for missing a payment.
Meanwhile, his labor is directly funding his ex-wife's lifestyle, including vacations to Cancun with the new boyfriend. Riker uses Dave to illustrate how a man can be reduced to an indentured servant by the state purely for the crime of getting married.
And it's not just blue-collar guys. He tells the story of John, a highly successful dentist out in San Diego. John spent 20 grueling years building up a $1.2 million specialty practice. He worked weekends, missed holidays, built the entire thing from the ground up.
According to Riker, John's wife had a long-term affair with her yoga instructor. When the marriage inevitably imploded, California's community property and asset-splitting laws kicked in.
John didn't just lose his home and primary custody of his children, he was forced to liquidate and hand over half the value of his practice to the very woman who destroyed the marriage. Riker argues that a lifetime of John's specialized, exhausting labor was simply transferred to her by a judge's pen stroke.
The most harrowing example in this section, however, comes from the UK. The book details the case of a British father who was actually jailed, criminally incarcerated, for what the court termed patriarchal terrorism.
And what was his crime? According to Riker, the man simply showed up at his ex-wife's house to demand his legally granted, court-mandated visitation rights with his children after she had repeatedly denied him access.
Because he raised his voice and demanded to see his kids, she claimed she felt threatened, and the police arrested him. Riker uses these specific, terrifying stories to argue that the legal system is not a place of justice.
It operates as a state-sponsored wealth and power transfer mechanism, funneling resources from men to women while denying men access to their own offspring.
As if the financial ruin of divorce wasn't terrifying enough for his reader, Riker then tackles what he considers the ultimate nuclear weapon in modern gender dynamics, the weaponization of false accusations.
He starts by establishing a baseline, citing data from the FBI and the Department of Justice to assert that roughly 8% of all rape and sexual assault allegations are eventually proven to be objectively false.
Now, he anticipates the counterargument. He acknowledges that critics will say 8% is a small minority of cases, but Riker argues that mathematically that 8% represents thousands upon thousands of innocent men every single year whose lives, careers, and reputations are instantly incinerated by a mere whisper.
Due to what he calls the hysteria of the Believe All Women movement, he provides incredibly high-profile, documented examples to illustrate the massive asymmetry of consequences in these situations. The anchor story here is Brian Banks.
For those who don't remember, Brian Banks was an elite blue-chip high school football star in California. He had a full-ride scholarship to USC waiting for him and was widely considered a future NFL prospect.
But a female classmate accused him of rape. Despite a lack of evidence, the threat of a massive sentence led to a plea deal, and Banks spent 5 horrific years in a maximum security prison and another 5 on parole as a registered sex offender.
His life was effectively over. His dreams were dead. But then, years later, the accuser was caught on a secret recording explicitly admitting that she had completely fabricated the entire story. She made it up.
Banks was finally fully exonerated by a judge, but his prime athletic years were gone. The NFL dream was dead.
Yeah.
But here is the part that Riker focuses on to highlight the systemic betrayal, what happened to the accuser.
According to the text, she faced absolutely 0 criminal charges for perjury or false imprisonment. In fact, because she sued the school district early on, claiming they failed to protect her on campus, she had received a massive $1.5 million civil payout.
Riker points to this as the ultimate sickness of the system. A man loses a decade of his life and his future over a lie, and the liar becomes a millionaire without consequence.
He reinforces this point by bringing up other infamous cultural touchstones. He discusses the Duke lacrosse case, where the entire team was publicly vilified, suspended, and dragged through the national media mud before definitive DNA evidence proved the accuser was lying.
He also brings up the mattress girl scandal at Columbia University, where a female student carried a mattress around campus for a year, claiming a male student raped her.
The university eventually expelled the male student, despite him providing exhaustive text message evidence demonstrating the encounters were entirely consensual. He was eventually vindicated in a Title IX lawsuit, but his college experience was ruined.
So after laying out this terrifying landscape of disposable labor, ruinous family courts, and the constant threat of false accusations, what is a man supposed to do? Riker's advice is brutally, chillingly pragmatic.
He tells his readers to treat every interaction with a woman, even a long-term partner, as a potential legal liability. He advises men to always record interactions, especially if an argument is starting or a relationship is going south.
He tells them to install dash cams that record audio in their cars, to put ring cameras on every entrance of their homes, and to meticulously back up and keep every single text message receipt on secure cloud servers.
And regarding marriage, his stance is absolute. He states that if a man is foolish enough to still want to get married in the current legal climate, Entering that contract without an ironclad prenuptial agreement is essentially financial suicide.
He specifically references Elon Musk as the gold standard here. He details how Musk, before marrying, utilizes legendary, airtight, multi-page prenuptial agreements designed to completely wall off his assets, his companies, and his future earnings from any potential divorce proceedings.
Riker argues that if the richest man in the world feels the need to protect himself from the family court system, the average man making $60,000 a year absolutely must do the same.
This systemic, inescapable betrayal, according to Riker, leaves men with absolutely no choice. They cannot win in the public square, and they cannot win in the courtroom, so they must retreat and build new structures.
This brings us to what the book calls the last sanctuaries, dojos, and digital brotherhoods. If the traditional places of male gathering are legally compromised, where are men actually going right now to find that primal brotherhood?
Here's where the book's proposed solutions get incredibly fascinating. Riker introduces the martial arts dojos, specifically Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai gyms, as one of the last remaining uncompromised male cathedrals in the modern world.
Why the dojo? Because, he argues, the training mat is a realm of pure, unforgiving, undeniable meritocracy.
The mat doesn't care. It simply doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care what your preferred pronouns are. It doesn't care how much you pay in alimony, what your corporate job title is, or how much you complain on the internet.
When you step on the mat, the only things that keep you from getting choked unconscious are your skill, your physical conditioning, your discipline, and your ability to correctly execute a technique under pressure. It strips away all societal privilege and leaves only raw competence.
And Riker actually dives into neuroscience to back up why men gravitate so intensely toward these specific combat spaces. He cites fascinating MRI studies out of Stanford University that looked at the brains of men engaging in combat sports.
The scans show that the male brain literally rewires itself and activates in entirely unique ways during physical sparring.
Wait, hold on. A 400% spike in neural connectivity. How does he connect a brain scan from a sparring session to the necessity of building an underground society?
It's a great question, and it's central to his thesis. The scans showed a 400% spike in neural connectivity in areas related to spatial awareness, threat assessment, and rapid problem solving during sparring, compared to resting states.
Right.
Riker uses this data to argue that men are biologically and neurologically optimized for controlled physical conflict. When a man is grappling, his brain is finally operating exactly as it evolved to operate.
Riker insists this isn't toxic masculinity, it's a vital, necessary biological release valve. If you deny men this physical outlet, that energy turns inward into depression or outward into chaotic, unguided aggression.
But of course, because this is Riker's worldview, he argues these sacred spaces are currently under aggressive attack. He shares a story about a Brazilian jiu-jitsu gym in Seattle.
This gym was an old-school, tough environment. But then they were slapped with a crippling $15,000 fine by a local civil rights commission for exclusionary practices. And the details of how this happened are wild.
According to the book, a female sociology student joined the gym. She didn't stick around to train hard. Instead, she essentially acted as an undercover observer.
She listened to the men talking aggressively in the locker room, noted the harsh competitive atmosphere on the mats, and then filed a massive bureaucratic complaint claiming the environment was hostile and unwelcoming to women.
The fallout from that complaint was devastating. The coach, who was just a guy trying to run a gym, went completely bankrupt trying to fight the legal fees and the fine. He lost the business.
The sociology student, meanwhile, used her experience to get a paper published in an academic journal about dismantling toxic spaces. Riker uses this anecdote as a stark warning. He believes that female-dominated bureaucratic systems will use any claim of harm or discomfort to infiltrate, regulate, and ultimately destroy physical male sanctuaries.
So, if the physical dojo is constantly at risk of being compromised by a lawsuit, what is the alternative? Riker says the next sanctuary is the digital realm.
He views online gaming and anonymous digital brotherhoods not as a waste of time, but as an unlikely yet absolutely vital salvation for modern men. He cites a fascinating study from the University of Essex.
Researchers analyzed over 500 massive multiplayer gaming sessions and found that male-only squads solved highly complex, coordinated tactical problems 37% faster than mixed gender groups.
That 37% metric is crucial for his argument. Riker asked why they were so much faster. His conclusion is that in a purely male-only squad, there is absolutely no performative peacocking.
Right, the guys aren't trying to show off. They don't have to watch their tone. They don't have to walk on eggshells to make sure everyone feels included. And they don't get distracted by subconsciously trying to impress a female squad mate.
They can be blunt, harsh, highly critical of each other's mistakes, and focus purely 100% on achieving the objective.
To illustrate the deep emotional bonds that form in these digital spaces, he provides some genuinely touching, surprising anecdotes. It's not all just yelling into headsets. He tells the story of a specific World of Warcraft guild.
This was a group of guys who only knew each other by their digital avatars. They were fishermen from the coast, software engineers from the city, mechanics. But they noticed that one of their core members, a coal miner living out in Wyoming, had stopped logging on.
When he did, he sounded completely defeated. He was spiraling into severe depression after a brutal divorce that had wiped him out financially.
What the guild did next is amazing. These guys, who had never met him in person, banded together online and secretly raised $12,000. They wired the money to the miner in Wyoming so he could pay his back rent, get some therapy, and retrain for a completely new career.
Riker uses this to prove that digital brotherhood is real brotherhood. He also cites the case of a divorced man whose cortisol levels, the primary stress hormone that destroys your body over time, measurably dropped by 28% after he joined a highly competitive, organized Counter-Strike league.
Riker argues the game provided the hierarchical success, the clear rules of engagement, and the reliable brotherhood that his brain desperately craved, effectively replacing his need for prescription antidepressants.
And then there is the famous corrupted blood incident. For those who don't game, this is a legendary event in World of Warcraft history that was so complex, actual epidemiologists from Johns Hopkins University studied it.
A virtual plague accidentally broke out in the game, infecting and killing players' characters rapidly. What fascinated researchers and what Riker absolutely loves about this story is how the players, predominantly male, reacted.
Without any top-down instruction from the game developers, and without any real-world bureaucratic oversight, the men instinctively self-organized.
They set up triage centers, they enforced strict quarantines at city gates, higher-level players sacrificed themselves to heal lower-level players, and they created functional, highly organized societies to manage the crisis.
Riker points to this as absolute, undeniable proof of men's innate biological ability to build order out of chaos when left to their own devices.
But naturally, Riker warns that these digital spaces are the current bleeding-edge front line of the gender war. If men are retreating to video games, he argues, the institutions will follow them there.
He points to what he views as massive feminist infiltration in the gaming industry itself. He cites highly publicized instances like Blizzard Entertainment allegedly firing a veteran lead designer because he point-blank refused to implement corporate-mandated diversity quotas in his character designs.
He also mentions BioWare, a massive RPG studio, fundamentally altering its game narratives and dialogue options to fit progressive, politically correct agendas, alienating its core audience.
And he talks about Ubisoft proactively going back into older games and removing things like bikini armor or overtly sexualized female characters just to avoid preemptively offending feminist critics on Twitter.
However, Riker notes a massive, undeniable pushback happening right now.
Yeah.
He highlights the astronomical financial success of games that refuse to bow to these pressures.
He points to the release of unapologetically gritty, violent, heavily masculine games like Cyberpunk 2077 or Black Myth Wukong. He views the billion-dollar sales of these titles as proof that men will relentlessly vote with their wallets to protect their escapism, rewarding studios that refuse to sanitize the male fantasy.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. If the public institutions are fully against you, the legal system is a trap, and even your digital hobbies are constantly being infiltrated by corporate HR metrics, what is the ultimate final solution for a man who wants to live free?
We are now moving into the most extreme part of the text. Building the fortress, physical and biological defense. This is where the book stops being sociological commentary and turns into a literal, step-by-step survival and construction manual.
Let's talk about the Manshed Manifesto. Riker advocates for every man to build a physical citadel on his own property, a place where absolutely no one else has jurisdiction.
And the level of architectural and acoustic detail he goes into here is frankly staggering. He approaches building a backyard shed like he's designing a Cold War nuclear bunker. He doesn't just say, put up some drywall.
He recommends using highly specific industrial materials. He outlines a wall construction method using mass-loaded vinyl, which is a heavy, dense acoustic material used in recording studios, sandwiched between thick layers of marine-grade plywood.
Furthermore, these layers must be separated by a precise 2-inch air gap completely filled with dense mineral wool insulation.
Okay, wait. Why all that specific effort? I mean, I know what soundproofing is, but why the focus on those exact materials?
Because of the physics of sound transmission, Riker actually pulls data from MIT Architectural Acoustic Labs. Apparently, standard household sheetrock and fiberglass insulation do a terrible job of blocking low mid-frequencies, specifically transmitting 97% of sound waves that sit between 120 and 180 hertz.
And here's the absolutely wild part. What sits exactly in that 120 to 180 hertz range? Riker explicitly labels this frequency range the nag resonance band.
He claims quite literally that this is the exact acoustic frequency of a female partner's complaining or yelling voice.
He promises his readers that if they build the walls of their shed to these exact specifications, it will reduce the sound of an angry neighbor or a furious partner screaming right outside the door to absolute dead silence inside. It is ultimate psychological isolation achieved through acoustic engineering.
But it's not just about blocking sound, it's about legal defense and securing the perimeter. He dedicates a whole chapter to zoning laws. Riker views local zoning boards and homeowner associations not as civic organizations, but as bureaucratic weapons primarily used by angry neighbors, whom he characterizes as Karens, to destroy male spaces.
To counter this, he teaches a concept he calls bureaucratic jujitsu. He details an amazing story about a guy in Virginia who found a massive legal loophole. This man wanted to build a huge 400-square-foot poker den and cigar lounge in his backyard.
But he knew the local zoning board would never approve a recreational structure of that size, so he read the local codes and registered the entire building under a specific agricultural storage designation.
To maintain plausible legal deniability, he fully furnished the inside like a high-end speakeasy, but he simply hung a single dirty shovel prominently in the front window.
It's hilarious, but it worked. When furious neighbors complained about the men gathering there, local inspectors came out, looked at the shovel, checked the agricultural code, and dismissed the complaints because, technically and legally, the structure qualified as a tool shed. It's a masterclass in using the system's own rigid rules against it.
But my absolute favorite, or maybe most intense, story in this section regarding perimeter defense is about a guy named Mike living out in Oregon. According to the book, Mike had gone through a brutal breakup.
His ex-girlfriend, furious that Mike refused to financially support her new boyfriend by buying him a motorcycle, actually tried to stage a home invasion. She showed up at his property at 3 a.m. with 3 of her large male friends trying to break down his door.
Now, Mike didn't call the police because Riker advises against inviting the state into your life. So how did Mike defend his fortress?
He used acoustic warfare. Mike had installed a $300 military-style acoustic sound cannon on his porch. When the intruders tried to breach the door, he activated it.
The device emitted a high-decibel, ultra-high-frequency screech that literally disrupted their inner ear fluid, causing the 3 men and the ex-girlfriend to collapse and violently vomit in his petunias before fleeing the property.
Vomiting in the petunias. Riker proudly calls this tactic botanical self-defense. It's an extreme, almost unbelievable story, but it perfectly illustrates the deep underlying mindset of the book. The belief that men are under constant literal siege and must be prepared to defend their space with overwhelming unconventional force.
Now, beyond the physical walls of the shed, Riker takes his philosophy inward. He argues that men must heavily fortify their own physical bodies against what he sees as environmental and societal feminization.
This brings us to a highly controversial concept he calls the estrogen effect. Riker claims that modern environments are chemically castrating men. He cites a highly debated UCLA environmental study claiming that airborne estrogen particles, originating from the massive societal use of birth control pills, are being excreted and vaporized into the water supply.
And then accumulating in the closed HVAC systems of modern corporate office buildings. Riker alleges that simply breathing the recycled air in a modern office can cause the testosterone levels in male workers to drop by a staggering 18% over a few months.
He takes it even further, pointing to a Yale study that tracked airborne hormones in enclosed fitness centers. He claims that the mere physical presence of ovulating women in tightly enclosed co-ed commercial gyms physically alters the ambient estrogen levels in the air, negatively impacting the testosterone production of the men working out next to them just by breathing the same air.
Now, regardless of the scientific consensus on those specific studies, Riker uses them to declare chemical warfare. To combat this, he says you must treat your body not as a temple, but as a weaponized fortress. He views physical prowess not just as health, but as a profound political statement.
He advocates for extreme, uncompromising dietary and physical regimens to forcefully overwrite this environmental degradation. He promotes what he calls the primal protocol.
Which is a strict 4,000 calorie a day diet consisting almost entirely of grass-fed beef, pasture-raised eggs, raw unpasteurized dairy, and organ meats. The stated explicit goal is to naturally boost a man's testosterone to an elite top-tier level of 950 nanograms per deciliter.
Furthermore, he pushes his raiders to lift incredibly heavy weights with the goal of building massive, imposing physical dimensions, specifically citing the goal of achieving 22-inch biceps.
But why? Why the hyper-focus on specific measurements like 22-inch biceps? It sounds like simple vanity.
It's not vanity for Riker, it's strategy. He argues that overwhelming physical size and undeniable physical strength serve as a subconscious legal and social deterrent.
He genuinely claims that when a massive, physically imposing, deeply masculine man walks into a family court, the judges, the opposing alimony lawyers, and the mediators subconsciously treat him with far more caution, deference, and respect than they do an average-sized, physically soft man.
He believes human beings are still primates, and size commands legal respect.
To prove that this extreme biological fortification works, he gives the example of a specialized, highly secretive retreat, a compound out in the remote wilderness of Montana. Men pay to go there for total isolation from all female and corporate influence.
Riker describes a day at this compound. It starts with mandatory 5 a.m. ice baths in rivers sitting at -10 degrees. Then they move to live-fire tactical firearms training, with a strict rule: you don't get to eat breakfast unless you can successfully hit a steel silhouette target at 300 yards under pressure.
The afternoon is spent doing brutal, no-tap submission grappling in the dirt.
And they allegedly tracked the physiological results of this environment. Riker claims they ran what he calls the testosterone trials at this compound.
Blood work showed that after just 30 days immersed in this brutal, highly competitive, entirely male-only environment, the participants saw an average 42% increase in their total testosterone levels.
Alongside a massive corresponding drop in their usage of anti-anxiety and depression medications, the environment cured the biology.
Okay, so you have the physical fortress built in your backyard, and you have built your body into a biological fortress. But Riker acknowledges that to truly survive outside the mainstream system long term, you need serious resources.
That leads us into the economics of the movement: brotherhood economics, security, and vetting. Riker believes that political voting is useless. He argues the only way to actually win is to financially starve the gynocentric system by building massive, untraceable, parallel economies.
He calls this strategy financial jujitsu. The entire objective is making your money completely invisible to the state, to the IRS, and most importantly, to divorce court forensic accountants.
The book suggests measures that sound like they belong in a spy thriller. For example, he talks about elite brotherhood networks taking their collective cash reserves, converting them entirely into physical gold bullion, and then literally burying that gold deep inside decommissioned concrete missile silos purchased across different Midwestern states.
Wait, if they are burying gold in concrete missile silos in the middle of nowhere, how do they even access it to use it?
The gold isn't for daily spending, it's the ultimate reserve currency for the network. It's immune to inflation and cannot be frozen by a bank. For daily operations and funding the resistance, he discusses micro-manufacturing co-ops.
He describes networks of skilled machinists who officially run shops, producing innocuous items, like high-end mountain bike parts. But in reality, when the doors lock, they are using their CNC machines to manufacture perfectly milled, entirely untraceable AR-15 lower receivers to supply the Brotherhood with off-the-book security.
And it's not just high-tech machining. He talks about everyday guys participating in this shadow economy. There's a story about Carlos, a guy running a popular, old-school, cash-only barbershop in a major city.
According to Riker, Carlos quietly skims untraceable $20 bills off the top of every single haircut. He pools this dark money and uses it to anonymously fund massive, highly visible highway billboards, exposing family court corruption and advertising men's rights legal defense funds.
And when it comes to digital money, Riker is absolutely obsessed with privacy coins. He explicitly references the Canadian trucker protests from a few years ago. He notes how terrifyingly easy it was for the government to simply press a button and freeze the traditional bank accounts of anyone who donated to the protests.
To bypass this vulnerability entirely, he advocates abandoning Bitcoin, which has a public ledger, and using heavily encrypted privacy-focused cryptocurrencies like Monero or Zcash.
He claims these specific coins use cryptographic protocols that make it virtually impossible for government agencies or hostile XYs to trace where the money is or who owns it.
But protecting millions of dollars in untraceable money requires protecting the communication networks discussing that money. Riker outlines digital strongholds that rival state-level intelligence agencies. He claims that standard, commercially available encrypted apps like Signal or Telegram are already compromised by intelligence agencies.
Instead, his inner circle networks use custom modified communication protocols utilizing post-quantum cryptography.
For the listener, post-quantum cryptography refers to cryptographic algorithms designed to be secure against the hypothetical code-breaking power of future quantum computers. It is the absolute bleeding edge of digital paranoia.
Riker says their encryption keys automatically mutate and change every 72 hours. He even talks about preserving what he calls the manosphere canon.
The core foundational texts, the banned YouTube videos, the legal strategies.
Right, by etching the raw data into 5D optical quartz glass disks. These disks are theoretically designed to survive a nuclear winter for millions of years, and he claims copies are currently buried deep underground on 3 different continents to ensure the knowledge outlives any societal collapse.
Furthermore, to avoid IP tracking or location pinging, senior members conduct their planning meetings wearing VR headsets, speaking inside virtual reality chat rooms, hosted on private, encrypted servers, physically floating on boats in international waters.
It is a level of paranoia that is staggering to contemplate. But as Riker points out, all of this gold, all of this quantum encryption, and all of these acoustic cannons mean absolutely nothing if you accidentally let a mole inside the perimeter.
So let's talk about the vetting process. Riker details the brutal, multi-stage psychological and physical vetting processes required to join these secret elite societies, groups he refers to with names like the Iron Council in Dallas or the Phoenix Brotherhood.
You cannot just sign up on a website. They put you through absolute hell to verify beyond a shadow of a doubt that you will not betray them to a woman, to the media, or to the state.
The vetting is intentionally designed to be a ruthless Darwinian filter. It begins with something seemingly simple, the $500 loan test. A senior member of the Brotherhood will approach a new recruit and casually ask to borrow $500 cash right then and there, with no explanation and no set date for repayment.
If the recruit hesitates, asks what it's for, or asks when he will get it back, he fails immediately. The logic is that if he values a relatively small amount of fiat currency over absolute trust and obedience to the Brotherhood, he is a liability and he is permanently out.
If he passes that, he moves to the public confrontation stress test. The Brotherhood will intentionally stage a highly volatile public argument in a crowded place, like a busy restaurant or a town hall.
The recruit is forced to stand up and loudly, aggressively defend a highly unpopular, deeply controversial men's rights statistic, such as the data on false rape accusations we discussed earlier, while strangers and planted actors actively jeer, insult, and scream at him.
The evaluators watch his physical reaction. If his voice shakes, if he breaks eye contact, or if he tries to soften the language to appease the crowd, he fails. He must demonstrate the ability to stand entirely alone against public hatred without flinching.
But the most intense, invasive psychological test involves biometric tracking. The evaluators will strap a heart rate monitor to the recruit and sit him in a chair. They will then systematically and ruthlessly insult his ex-wife, his current girlfriend, or his mother.
They will monitor his pulse in real time. If his heart rate spikes significantly when the woman is insulted, the Brotherhood views it as definitive proof that he is still emotionally compromised by female validation or protective instinct.
If he cannot detach his biology from his emotions, he is rejected as a security risk.
And for the absolute inner circle, the men who control the money and the infrastructure, Riker demands a brutal physical initiation. To prove he has conquered the modern addiction to comfort, a final stage recruit must survive 72 hours intentionally homeless on the streets of a major city.
He is stripped of his wallet, his phone, and his keys. He is given nothing but the clothes on his back and a simple multi-tool. He must prove he can endure absolute freezing rock bottom without breaking.
Finally, upon his return, exhausted and starving, he must immediately engage in a grueling bare-knuckle sparring match with a fresh, fully rested senior member. He doesn't have to win, but he must refuse to quit.
Riker's logic is terrifyingly simple. Modern society controls men by weaponizing their desire for comfort. Therefore, men who pass these trials prove they will endure literal pain, starvation, and humiliation rather than submit to the system.
Which brings us to the culmination of the book. You've built the physical fortresses, you've secured the untraceable funds, you've brutally vetted a cadre of loyal men. How do you actually use this infrastructure to fight back culturally? How do you win the war?
This leads to the final thematic area, winning the narrative and forging a legacy. Riker views all mainstream media, television, movies, journalism, not as entertainment, but as active, hostile enemy artillery designed to demoralize men.
He points to major streaming platforms, claiming that if you analyze Netflix family dramas, 78% of fathers are explicitly portrayed as incompetent, bumbling buffoons who need their wives to save them.
He brings up the infamous Gillette razor ad from a few years ago, claiming it intentionally labeled the basic rough and tumble wrestling of young boys as a symptom of toxic behavior that needed to be eradicated.
To counter this massive cultural artillery, Riker heaps praise on alternative media figures who have managed to break the mainstream censorship monopoly. He points to the unbelievable world-shifting influence of Joe Rogan.
Riker argues that Rogan's format, 3-hour unedited long-form podcasts, bypasses all traditional media gatekeepers, allowing unfiltered, highly nuanced conversations about masculinity to directly reach tens of millions of young men every single week.
He also praises conservative commentators like Ben Shapiro, specifically highlighting Shapiro's rapid-fire, relentless deployment of hard statistics to completely dismantle emotional, feeling-based arguments. Riker notes how phrases like facts don't care about your feelings became absolute rallying cries for a generation of young men seeking logical grounding.
And unsurprisingly, he views Elon Musk's multi-billion-dollar purchase of Twitter as a literal digital D-Day. He frames it as the moment the beachhead was secured, suddenly allowing suppressed data on family court corruption, male suicide rates, and men's issues to flow freely across the global timeline without the threat of algorithmic suppression or shadow banning by progressive tech employees.
Building on that, Riker's advice to the individual man in his daily life is to practice what he calls communication warfare. He says men need to drastically alter how they speak. They need to speak male without apology.
He actually cites linguistic studies showing that when men use tentative, diplomatic, or hedging language to appease modern corporate HR standards, using phrases like, I feel like maybe we should, they're subconsciously viewed by both men and women as weak and less competent.
Instead, he advocates for blunt, factual, unapologetic assertion.
Furthermore, he deeply understands the modern internet landscape, and he absolutely loves weaponizing dark humor. He argues that trying to debate a feminist scholar with a 40-page academic essay is a waste of time.
Instead, he says, a single well-crafted Wojak comic. And for the listener, Wojaks are those simple, highly expressive black and white internet meme faces used to convey deep existential exhaustion or cynicism, can bypass all intellectual defenses.
He claims that a viral meme highlighting the pathetic absurdity of Simp Nation, the culture of men paying exorbitant amounts of money to women on OnlyFans just for basic attention, bypasses censorship and red pills young men far faster and more permanently than any political manifesto ever could. Humor is the ultimate Trojan horse.
What's truly wild to read, though, is the length to which he suggests going for the men who are already casualties of the system. For the men who are currently drowning in impossible alimony payments or facing life-ruining false charges, memes aren't enough. For them, Riker details the ultimate escape hatch, the Underground Railroad.
Yes, he literally outlines a highly sophisticated, internationally coordinated network dedicated to entirely ghosting compromised men out of their home countries to jurisdictions where Western family law holds no power.
He tells a story that reads like a Jason Bourne movie. It's about a guy named Mark, a highly specialized, very successful surgeon. Mark was suffocating under a court order demanding $15,000 a month in alimony to a wife who had cheated on him. It was destroying his health.
So the Brotherhood activated the network. First, they used burner phones and complex offshore shell corporations to quietly, slowly liquidate and move Mark's assets over a period of months.
Then, using their professional networks, they secured Mark a lucrative medical license transfer to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. Crucially, Dubai has zero income tax. And more importantly, they absolutely do not enforce U.S. family court alimony orders.
But the genius and the paranoia is in how they covered his escape. To prevent his ex-wife's lawyers from freezing his passport at the airport, the Brotherhood employed digital doppelgangers.
They hired services that spoofed Mark's phone location and IP address. While Mark was boarding a first-class flight to the Middle East, his digital footprint made it look exactly like he was swiping on fake Tinder dates in his home city, logging into his local gym's Wi-Fi, and even attending a men's church group.
By the time his ex-wife and her lawyers realized he wasn't paying, Mark was operating in a Dubai hospital. According to the book, the ex-wife wasted over $27,000 hiring private investigators to chase a digital ghost around the city, while Mark started a completely new tax-free life.
Finally, as the massive book draws to a close, Riker turns his attention to the future in a section he calls Fatherhood's Last Stand. He believes that building these fortresses and escaping the system is only a stopgap measure.
The only way to ensure the long-term survival of these parallel structures and to eventually reclaim the culture is to train the next generation of boys entirely differently than the current system demands.
He completely unequivocally rejects the modern public educational system. He claims that modern schools are designed for female learning styles, sitting still, being quiet, collaborative group work, and that they actively medicate normal, high-energy boys with ADHD drugs to force them into docility, pathologizing their natural kinetic energy.
To counter this, he advocates for pulling boys out of the system and training them through raw Darwinian hustle. He demands absolutely no screen time and heavily criticizes the concept of participation trophies. He wants boys out in the elements.
He advocates for things like 50-pound pack orienteering in the freezing wilderness to build unbreakable physical resilience. Academically, he suggests completely replacing modern social studies or gender studies curriculums with brutal, pragmatic history lessons.
He specifically recommends teaching teenage boys the Machiavellian strategies found in Robert Greene's famous book, The 48 Laws of Power, ensuring they understand human manipulation and hierarchy.
And he emphasizes the absolute necessity of mechanical competence. He shares a story of a father in the network who refused to buy his 15-year-old son a car. Instead, the father bought a broken-down truck and paid his son to completely rebuild the transmission by hand, using only manuals and trial and error.
Riker argues that true, unshakable male confidence does not come from emotional validation therapy or being told you are special. It only comes from facing a dangerous, complex physical problem, solving it with your own two hands, and achieving hands-on competence.
He believes boys raised this way will be completely immune to the guilt and manipulation of the modern gynocentric system.
So, what does this all mean? We've spent over an hour exhaustively detailing a worldview that is incredibly intense, deeply uncompromising, and fundamentally radically alienated from mainstream society. I want to leave you with a provocative thought, something to really chew on after you take off your headphones.
Let's hear it.
Beyond the extreme rhetoric, beyond the acoustic sound cannons making people vomit, beyond the gold buried in missile silos and the quantum encryption, what does it genuinely say about the underlying stability of our modern society when a massive, rapidly growing demographic of men feels so entirely, hopelessly alienated by our core foundational institutions?
The marriage, the justice system, the education system.
Exactly. What does it say when they have completely given up on reforming them and are instead actively, enthusiastically, and apparently successfully building a heavily encrypted, militarized, parallel civilization right beneath our feet?
It is a massive, complex, and frankly unsettling question. And this book certainly throws a massive tank of gasoline on that cultural fire. As we wrap up this ultra-long journey, we want to reiterate and emphasize once more that our mission today was strictly to analyze, deconstruct, and report.
We are not endorsing anything.
The deep dive remains entirely neutral. We are absolutely not endorsing the highly politically charged ideas, the extreme tactics, or the ideology presented by Conrad Riker. We are simply acting as your guides through the source material, breaking down the architecture of these arguments so you know exactly what's being discussed, planned, and built out there in the ether of the internet.
It has been a heavy ride, but a necessary one to understand the current cultural fracturing. We have been deep diving into the dense, controversial new ebook, Guarding Male Spaces, Sacred Manosphere Transmission of Red-Pilled Knowledge from Time Immemorial by Conrad Riker.
If your curiosity is piqued, if you want to verify the claims, analyze the text for yourself, or just see the sheer scale of the manifesto, remember to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book directly. You can also dive deeper into the author's ongoing real-time thoughts by following @Conrad Riker on Substack.
Highly recommend checking the primary source.
And finally, to you, our listener, thank you for sticking with us, locking in, and taking this ultra-long, intense journey today. Please remember to like and subscribe to the Deep Dive on whatever platform you are listening on right now. so we can keep unpacking the most fascinating, controversial, and vital texts shaping our chaotic world today. See you next time.